Lando Calrissian was my favorite Halloween costume of all time. It was 1980, and The Empire Strikes Back was the hottest movie in the country. Now, for a 10-year-old who was raised on a steady diet of science fiction and comic books by his big brother, nothing was better than Star Wars. And there he was on screen, larger than life, a space scoundrel with the best cape in the galaxy, Lando Calrissian. And he looked like me. Okay? Now, my Halloween costumes as a kid were pretty typical for the 1970s. Superman, Batman, Shazam, Captain Marvel, if you're a real comic book geek. Yeah, that is me. But for someone who thrived on authenticity, these costumes just never felt right. Now, first off, the Superman costume came with a mask. Superman does not need a mask. Clark Kent wears glasses, so Superman doesn't need to wear a mask. But in hindsight, that was the least of the problems with these costumes. The unconscious message: if you want to be a hero, you need to be white. Now, I'm sure that the creators of these costumes were not part of a grand conspiracy of white supremacy. I can pretty much guarantee that. But what they did is what people tend to do, and that's create for who and what they know. Now, growing up, my heroes, Captain Kirk, the Fonz, Superman, and Danny Zuko. Okay? Danny Zuko, because Grease was the first Broadway musical that I saw. When I was young, I had dreams of singing and dancing on stage, just like I saw that night. And I know seeing Grease really fostered my love of musical theater, which still exists today. But as I got older, I realized that the kids at Rydell High didn't look like me. So I figured that my dreams of playing Danny Zuko were never going to happen. And that's why Lando Calrissian was so important. I could close my eyes and imagine that I was Lando. Not Luke Skywalker, not Han Solo, but Lando Calrissian. Now, I share this with you to state the obvious. Diversity matters. Okay? Don't take it from me. In 2015, a global management consulting firm, McKinsey & Company, published a report titled Diversity Matters. And they found statistical evidence between the financial success of companies with diverse leadership as opposed to those without. Okay. Now, out of all the companies that were examined, they discovered a linear relationship, okay, between the financial and ethnic diversity and increased financial performance. Okay. There was a 35% increase in racial and ethnic diversity on a senior level, and earnings rose 0.08%. Okay. Now, corporate America is paying attention. Many of the top companies in the country have initiated diversity programs. Now, in particular, ABC has decided to really invest in creators of color and not just on their on-screen talent. Former president of ABC Entertainment, Paul Lee, said that going to storytellers who come from different groups will unleash a creativity that is really going to resonate. Their investment is paying off. It's Nielsen, the company that tracks TV viewership, so in order to track advertising rates, discovered that one of the biggest myths in TV marketing was just that, a myth. TV programs where predominantly black casts or black leads garner substantial viewership from non-African Americans. Okay? Now, TV is figuring it out. Can Broadway? Now, anytime you mention Broadway and diversity in the same sentence, we all have to acknowledge the $3 million a week elephant that walks into the room. Hamilton. Now, I love Lynn. I love Hamilton. Thank God that we have Lynn. But we have to acknowledge that Hamilton is a once-in-a-generation phenomenon. Imagine what the diversity statistics on Broadway would look like if we didn't have Hamilton. Okay? Hamilton is great, but it's just not enough. Okay? John Leguizamo could only write so many plays. Broadway is guaranteed to have at least one creator of color represented on Broadway every year for years to come. Okay? But like I said, that's just not enough. Some writers who have appeared on Broadway: David Henry Wang, Chiara Alegria Hudes, Susie Laurie Parks, Charles Fuller, Nilo Cruz. Okay? Combined, these 6 playwrights have won 6 Pulitzer Prizes and 3 Tony Awards. Okay? On Broadway, they account for 8 productions. 4 of those 8 were by David Henry Wang. Okay? And that doesn't include revivals. Now, in comparison, David Mamet, Richard Greenberg, and Martin McDonough have combined to win 1 Pulitzer and 1 Tony. Collectively, their shows have appeared on Broadway 26 times, not including revivals. Okay. Now, we all understand the business of Broadway. Producers are charged with putting butts into seats in order to first pay back their investors, and second, to turn a profit. Profits which hopefully and ideally will be used to create more theater. Now, we have the data. The average Broadway ticket buyer is college educated, female, and white. That is who we as an industry are selling to. So of course it's easier for us to sell them something that we think appeals to them. White shows become the standard bearer, and shows that tell other stories that are labeled as being different. And that's the problem, because producers create for who and what they know. With the majority of the gatekeepers on Broadway being white, there's a natural disposition to select white stories. Now, I know that's a great big blanket statement to make, but we have to recognize that theater owners give priority to producers who have a successful track record on Broadway. Producers usually work with the same creators who they've had success with in the past, and that's their prerogative. No one's questioning that. But with a limited number of theaters available for commercial production on Broadway, even less when you factor in all the long-running shows that tie up theaters for years, it makes it really hard for new creators to get into the room where it happens. Okay. Many of the companies that have created these diversity initiatives have taken a cue from the National Football League of all places, okay? An initiative that they have called the Rooney Rule. Okay? Established in 2003, the Rooney Rule is a policy that was created to combat the lack of diversity amongst NFL head coaches. It's a very simple concept. Every team with a vacant head coaching position has to interview at least one qualified candidate of color. That's it. You see, the NFL, much like Broadway, is a closed ecosystem. Most teams are family-owned, and top executive positions are usually kept in the family. Getting a head coaching job in the NFL is more about who you know as opposed to what you can do and what you're capable of doing. The Rooney Rule works to get qualified candidates of color into the room where it happens in front of owners. Now, is it a perfect system? Of course not. For every success that the Rooney Rule has created, there are stories of coaches who get token interviews to fulfill the obligations of the rule. But it's something. Initiating change is not easy. What it takes is buy-in from the executive level. See, 30 of the largest law firms in the company have gotten together to create their own version of the Rooney Rule. They call it the Mansfield Rule. And that's named after Arabella Mansfield, who was the first woman who was certified to practice law in the United States. These law firms are committed to have 30% of all candidates for open leadership positions be filled by either women or people of color. In the off-Broadway community and around the country in the regional theaters, there have been discussions about a Rooney Rule for the theater. The Soul Project is trying to be an agent of change. Led by their artistic director, Jacob Padron, the Soul Project, all right, give it up for Jacob, all right. The Soul Project is dedicated to producing the work of Latinx playwrights. Okay? They have partnered with 12 theaters here in New York City, as well as across the country, in the hope of producing 12 plays by both emerging and established playwrights. Okay? Now, the idea is that by partnering not just with New York City-based theaters, but also with regional theaters, that the plays will have a longer life and will give more exposure to the writers. So far, they've successfully mounted 3 productions in partnership with New George's Theater, Rattlesnake Playwrights Theater, and the Public Theater. Now, should the board of directors of theaters be required to interview qualified candidates of color for open artistic or executive leadership positions? Should literary managers be required to have a certain number of playwrights of color in their stable of plays for future productions, future seasons? There's a fine line between initiating quotas and upholding the spirit of what the Rooney Rule attempts to achieve. Okay? That's leveling the playing field. We can all agree that quotas are not bad, and that's not what this is trying to achieve. It's just about making things even. Okay? Now, the Theater Communications Group, which is the national organization of the American theater, they've been working on issues of diversity and inclusion for a number of years now. And recently, they've gotten 20 of their constituents together to talk about issues of diversity and try to figure out what it means to them and why it's important. They crafted a document, and a line from that document states, "The American theater was founded on the spirit of collaboration, an ideal that a whole is greater than the sum of its parts. To gain the maximum benefit from the increasing diversity of our communities, organizations must make every member feel welcome and motivated. It's possible to work better together because of differences, not despite of them." Now, at the end of the day, Broadway is just a collection of individual business owners. Each Broadway season is a unique organism. Okay? All the Broadway theater owners and producers, they all have their own unique set of agendas and priorities. Okay? The seasons are a unique organism that is created organically, okay, by a mass set of variables and circumstances. Is there a way to implement a mandate similar to the Rooney Rule for commercial producers to follow? Probably not. It's not realistic. But is it possible for the gatekeepers on Broadway to take a step back and look at how they do business and try to evoke the spirit of such a rule? Possibly, probably, hopefully. Okay. Now, clearly, the lens through which I look at all this is that of a New York-born, straight man from an Afro-Caribbean heritage. If I was a woman, part of the LGBT community, or any other underrepresented community in this country, I'd have a different perspective. And ultimately, that's my point. We all have different perspectives, different stories that we want to hear, different stories that we want to tell. All anyone wants is to see themselves represented in the world, on stage and off. Let's strive to be better at getting all of our stories told so that Broadway can truly be the best that it can be. Thank you very much.